So you already heard part of the story that I'm going to tell you today. And I will be focusing on data, but I will look at it from a little bit of a different context. So I will be focusing on historical data. Give 1 second, please. He's going to keep calling, so I'm sure you don't mind if I get this one really quick. Hello? Hey? Yeah, well, it's kind of awkward. I'm actually in the middle of a presentation. Yeah, it's one of the, no, it's really one of the best SAP events I've been to. Yeah, great prep. Yeah, it's that handsome guy, Paul. Yep. Can you keep it short? The moon, Mars, okay? Yeah, I mean, you call me whenever you need a problem solved, so I just, let me call you back, okay? Yeah, I'll call you back later, I promise. No, I call you. Okay, bye, Elon, bye. So, sorry about that. So we're going to talk about data and historical data. We started with the R2 to R3 migration, long time ago. That's how we started. That evolved into a product named JiVS. And JiVS really is an integrated platform that supports different use cases. And at the end of the day, every use case that we support is also focusing on historical data. And it has to do with our roots. So whenever we did this migration, the customer asked us, hey, what am I supposed to do with this R2 system? And I have another good story for you related to R2 here in a little bit. But I don't want to keep R2 running. We're successfully on R3. What should we do? So back then, we separated the data from the application layer, threw it somewhere almost, and developed a really simple web user interface to access that data for compliance, tax, retention purposes, okay? And if you look at the platform, that evolved into, of course, still supporting the migration scenario, typically more of a greenfield approach that we support in that area. Then key, again, is application retirement or application archival. So typical scenario there is you have legacy systems, any system, SAP as well as non-SAP, mainframe and so forth, and want to retire those systems, get rid of those systems. In addition to that, for right sizing, typically, before you move to the cloud maybe, or before you even tackle an S4 project, even though we do that typically during the migration. And then active archival, typical scenario there is you are on S4, you want to keep it lean as possible. So we support that as well. And then in mergers and acquisition scenarios, carving out very, very specific data sets, bring it to a staging area, and then maybe into a future core. Okay, so integrated platform that supports all those use cases. And what I wanted to do today is not to talk to you too much about the tool and the details of the tool, even though I will be talking about the access to the historical data after you migrated, and just create some context and then talk about customer references and what they did and really, really specific examples when it comes to retiring systems. Again, any system that you can think of. And JiVS becomes kind of a single source of truth when it comes to historical data. So you can, after you retired all those different applications, you still have access to them, of course, for compliance, tax, legal reasons, but even for operational reasons. And you can create searches and reports even across all those systems, no matter what kind of system it was that you retired. The approach is always the same. It's a very technical, hands-on approach. We separate the data from the application layer. Compliance plays a big role, of course, during every single step of that process. And you move it into JiVS. And JiVS can run anywhere you like. So it can be on-prem, private cloud. We have a SaaS solution available as well, but it's absolutely agnostic. We're Swiss guys. We started in Switzerland. We're absolutely neutral. Okay? So once the data is in JiVS, now it's all about end user access. And this is where JiVS shines. Okay? We have a lot of standard objects available. What it is it's canned reports. And what they do is, since we store all the data in a transparent, non-proprietary format, which is a table format, those canned reports, they bring the context back. So just for SAP, it's about 1,500, and so forth. And that allows a non-technical end user to then go into the system for audit purposes, for example, provide the data that is needed, so smart that you can even enter an SAP transaction code, and you will get exactly the data that you're looking for. It supports structured as well as unstructured data. And key here really is you shut down your legacy system. It's gone after that. That has to be the goal. So we're not asking you, and you shouldn't look at it that way, that you have to keep it in some kind of hybrid mode, okay? And then you can start it up again when you need it. That's not the case. So you can truly get rid of your legacy systems. And then you have access to it. And what's interesting with JiVS is, besides those standard reports, those canned reports that I mentioned, and having access based on this web user interface to structured as well as unstructured content, is, in addition to that, if you retire an ECC system, you can access data that sits in JiVS now through the S4 user interface. Seamless. Seamless. So that, of course, and that capability to have that available, that the end user doesn't even know where the data comes from, that then also led to our approach, to our migration approach. And this is just an example. This is just for illustration purposes, but that's the data that will be sitting in JiVS. Then you have operational data. It can be Fiori as well, so there's no restriction. But this also led to a migration approach where we say, why move more than the absolutely necessary data to the future core? Because you're still going to have access to it. So that's the JiVS approach. And I will not spend too much time on this, but of course, once the data is in JiVS, retention management is still an important topic. Data can be a liability, and you should treat it as such as well. So you only want to keep what you have to keep, and everything else you're going to delete. That's what the retention management module is for. And then you have specific regulations, especially in Europe. We have GDPR, where we have requirements such as the right to be forgotten, where you have to be able to delete very specific data sets of a former employee. That tells you, hey, I want you 7 years after they left to delete all the data that relates to me. You have to comply with that in Europe. Here in the US, CCPA heads towards that direction, but it just shows the capabilities at the end of the day. Are you going to use it just for data lifecycle management, older than 7 years, I want to delete it, tax and legal hold, and so forth? Or do you have to be able to go a step further and actually permanently delete data, very specific data sets? So this just the migration approach then. So if you think about that, the data is available, it's in a transparent format, and you can access it out of S4. What it means is, in our approach, we typically do a greenfield approach with a lot of the brownfield benefits. So we only move open items, master data to the future core. We use the SAP's migration cockpit to then provide the data. You can massage the data. I heard that's now an official term when it comes to working on data. You can create the golden records and so forth. You do that in JiVS. We have the mapping rules for the future core. All that is available in JiVS. Then we take the data, provide it to SAP's migration cockpit, and you're good to go. When we're looking at the benefits of all that, and just if you keep focusing a little bit more on this topic of historical data, and the ballast you have, the responsibility you keep in the house, then of course, the immediate concern might be the ECC system. And that's correct, because you're leaving that behind, if you like. What are you going to do with this? Well, retire it. Move it into JiVS. You don't need it anymore. And even if you chose a greenfield approach in the past, you can still retire it. We can still provide the integration out of S4. That's a possibility as well. But make it part of your overall strategy. I did mention earlier that we also do carve-outs and migrations. This is a mix of both, where we did the carve-out and then the migration to S4 itself. But when I talk about a business case, this is really what's behind it. Think about this. You need a budget to move to S4. And the CFO looks at this and he says, okay, where's the business case for that? And even though S4 offers a lot, absolutely, it's not easy to create that case. Value case, yes. Business case, little harder. So I have an example. It's a customer in Dallas, and he needed a substantial budget to move to S4. And then he included us, and he said, what I would like to do is, I want to address our legacy systems. And we have many of them. The customer is energy transfer. In the meantime, and he made that part of the case to move to that future core, which is S4 in their case, we retired over 220 systems, legacy systems, into JiVS. Oracle, mainframe, typical customer profile. They grew based on acquisitions. Every time they purchased a company, they inherited the landscape and the liability. So we retired over 220 systems into JiVS, over 300 terabyte total in this case, and they keep going. And he made that part of the case. And the same counts, of course, for an ECC system. Make it part of the case that you retire that system. And maybe also other legacy system, because it's a transformation approach. And the really cool one is also this one here. And I really like this one because, I'm not sure if I wrote it here. No, I did not. We started with an R2 migration. I mentioned that earlier. Here, we are retiring one of the last R2s that is still running. Think about, and this is positive, so the customer reacts. This is Schlumberger. Now SLB, a little easier for everybody to pronounce. But think about the liability also of some of those old legacy systems that you keep running in-house. I see old mainframe systems still running. There is no way that they are compliant with today's requirement. You move the data into JiVS, you're compliant again. Yeah? HP is another customer of ours. Here the story was a little different. We didn't do the migration. We also didn't do it for SLB, by the way. We focused on the legacy system retirement topic. But this is really the core strength of JiVS at the end of the day. And HP Inc. in this case, they had a landscape of 50 applications with 250 terabyte traditional storage. And now, if you look at that a little bit visualized, this is how they reduced their landscape. This is HP Inc. Okay? And in this case, it was SAP only, where in most other cases, it's in many cases, it's a mix, okay? And what I didn't mention earlier either is that JiVS is not only for a migration from an ECC system to S4. It's any other system to S4 as well. So if you have a JD Edwards maybe in-house and you need a migration, JiVS supports that as well. Spoke about energy transfer as a customer. Marathon Petroleum, here the story was a little different. They migrated to S4 and then they focused on retiring the ECC system. So we did that for them. And there are many other systems as well. I can't go too much into detail, but it's just a typical customer profile also. Again, grew based on acquisitions, and they end up with this complex, expensive landscape. And to compare the cost, because that's going to be one of your questions, is, well, what if I just keep them in-house? What if there is not a risk or a liability related to those systems? Where else is the benefit? The cost reduction in comparison is about 80%. And that easily. We have, I have examples where the retirement of one application, just because they were able to do it before a license renewal came into the house, already paid for the retirement of 10 applications that they had to retire. So there's a phenomenal business case behind this application retirement scenario. And if we look at the customers that have retired several applications, most people today talk about AI, okay? And marketing is going to be very proud of me. I mentioned AI. The core of it is data and access to that data has to be available. And if you store data in JiVS, you can use that data for any purpose. Now we have customers, they still use that data maybe in a Power BI, okay? But of course, since AI becomes more important, a core like that allows you to use the data that you store there freely. And that's very powerful. And especially, looking at some of the tools that my peers from SAP have been talking about, powerful tools, and everybody's trying to make sense of AI, and data quality is certainly a topic, and where do I get the right data from that I need? You need a core like this that will enable you to do that. Now, when we say we store everything in a transparent way, for example, we decluster tables. So it's truly transparent what's available in JiVS. Another good story is certainly this one. This has been a long-term customer of ours. Lafarge Holcim, today Holcim again. They started out with 280 servers, and they are now down to 2 servers. And again, they keep growing based on acquisitions. So JiVS becomes a fixed element of their architecture. Whenever they integrate the company, those legacy systems, they are being retired into JiVS. That's just to illustrate that customer story. And when we look at historical data and the power of it, and since you can still access it and it's still available, and everybody is looking for a business case, I would urge, not just because of JiVS, and yes, of course, that's the product I represent here, but not just because of JiVS, but look at what you're going to do with your historical systems. Add that to your business case. Get rid of your ECC system permanently. There is no reason to keep it. So every audit that you will do in the future you will do in JiVS. That's where they access it. So a controller goes into JiVS, he pulls the reports, that's how you do it. Do we maybe open up for a Q&A or?
Yes, we have. We're unprecedentedly early, so yes, let's open it up for questions if we can. And I thought that made a huge amount of sense.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I want to retain the data.
Yes.
I'm a utility, and I don't want the liability of the data beyond 7 years. Do you have anything that can handle that kind of situation?
Yes. So I would absolutely. I would start by initially moving all the data into JiVS and have it there, and then permanently delete in JiVS based on the retention management module that I mentioned earlier. That's where you're going to permanently delete it.
Yeah, but that's the problem I'm trying to overcome, because the moment you delete it in JiVS, I'm losing the value of that 30-year historical data of all the trends and analytics that I can get on that data without being liable for the underlying business transaction.
But you can,
repeat the question for the folks that are watching online.
Sure, absolutely. So is it, can you hear me?
They can hear you, but we didn't have.
I couldn't hear the question. So the question really was that, yes, permanently deleting it is good, but that data still has value from a maybe an analysis kind of perspective, and maybe even AI where you want to use it. So it's a good point. Now you can look at JiVS as a cold storage solution, just to be very clear. So JiVS runs on top of a SQL server, anywhere you like. I mentioned that during the intro. Extremely scalable. And you can set that up to where you really have a cold storage environment that is cheap. And the data is still going to be available. It's still there. So if you say you want to make a distinction between cold, luke, hot, you can do that.
No, it's not about cold, luke, hot. It is about no liability from a legal perspective,
Yep.
because I don't want to know what the underlying business transaction to that data was,
Yep.
but I do want the value of the data.
Well, you can, here is the deal though, this is compliance. You can separate it, but you have to be aware that if you have data available, you have to provide it. That's not me talking.
Sure, but I want to keep that data in a way it cannot be reconstructed.
Sure, to keep it in a way where it can't be reconstructed.
Once you've got the data, you can always separate it to some system and use data warehousing or
True,
whatever.
but it's a good question.
All right,
Thank
we
you.
have another question here, right? Anybody else?
Hi. Is the data only for the migration case, or also it's an ongoing thing? Let's say I want to move the data, let's say after 3 years, or ongoing, because some transactions which are closed probably need not be in this for primarily, right? So, or is it only during the migration that we do, okay, everything in the cold storage? Or let's say I do a periodic rule saying, periodic archives into JiVS, say, let's say every 3 years, if certain conditions are met.
Both.
We move them ongoing into JiVS so that,
Yep.
it's an ongoing. So it's both, right?
Both, absolutely, it is both. Now, when it comes to the archival approach, there really is, in air quotes, no other way to permanently delete data out of an operational SAP system besides ILM ADK. So the deletion scenario itself, if you want to keep archiving in the future, would be based on that, of course. And if you have during the migration certain data sets where you say, hey, this is something that I want to keep now, you can do that. You can separate it. Ongoing. Yeah, absolutely.
How different is it from the standard archiving? Apart from that.
Yeah, I think we're going to have the same issue with the microphone. So how difficult is it in comparison to ADK? Well, the big benefit is the retrieval part again. So you're still going to have an archival strategy generally on the SAP side. It's more the retrieval part where JiVS just brings enormous value to the table because of that still seamless access for the end users. no matter where the data resides, if you like, okay? So if you delete it out of S4, you're still going to be able to see it in JiVS and seamless out of S4 if you want that. And in many cases, you know, customers say, well, we don't need that for every T code or transaction. We have certain transactions where we want that functionality, where we need that functionality. And that's typically where business is accessing historical data frequently. That's where you want that integration piece. Just for audit purposes, once a year, twice a year, you don't need that. You have the platform and that access usually. So that's how we distinguish that.
So maybe just one last question, and then if folks have questions afterwards, I'm sure Jean Marc would be happy to stay and answer them here, or you have the booth. So
sure.
Last question.
My question is around complexity. When you said legacy system can be anything like SAP, ERP, Oracle, or anything, right? But when you are replicating it into JiVS, right? How complex? Because you know all the data stored in my legacy is connected. For example, PO, goods receipt, invoice, and I have a drill down functionality if I keep my legacy, right? But when it moves to JiVS, is it a kind of static where because I'm believing I will lose my drill down functionality if I move it to the JiVS?
Yeah, well, so initially, yes, you're right, because we store it in this transparent table format.
Yeah.
So the logic, those canned reports, that's what brings the logic back into the game, including drill downs, including document attachments that might be behind it. So you're going to have those standard reports, the canned reports that do that for you. You will have custom reports, those you can build at your convenience, whatever is needed. But again, this is just going to be in the future mostly for maybe an audit purpose. So you don't need to rebuild the functionality that, for example, an Oracle EBS had. Not necessary. You look at it from an audit compliance perspective, what kind of reports will I need in the future? And those are the ones that you build that will bring back that functionality that you are looking for. The relationship between the data, the drill down capabilities, the document attachments, wherever the documents might reside, by the way.
Got it. The other one, very quick one on the cost, means it was difficult to understand how it can reduce, because you know keeping legacy system just with few user license, right, with the display access can be quite cheaper than doing all this migration to JiVS, then giving all that implementation cost plus licensing everything in JiVS. I'm not able to understand how. To me, it looks like it could be 80% more than what I could, do keeping a legacy with just few licenses.
It's a good question. You will, of course, still need to maintain that infrastructure, which means you're going to have also support and maintenance fees that are related to infrastructures. Honestly, no matter if it's SAP or not, it's always the same topic, okay? But the infrastructure itself, and then especially if you have different kind of systems, you need to have know-how available to maintain all those different systems. And that's really where the cost reduction comes in.
All right, Jean Marc, I'm going to get told off if we don't get the photo. So last time you get stand up, last selfie photo.
Awesome.
There we go. Hold it up nice and level. Big smile, everyone.